Welcome to Ocmaya, the Global Paradigm Expansion Project. This is the exemplary piece regarding politics with a bit of economics to understand how we perpetuate war through our collective paradigm. So essentially why we have been engaging in armed conflicts for now more than 5,000 years. And in this piece, I want to show how by changing our paradigm in terms of the interpretation of power, then it could be more difficult to engage in war than with the current paradigm that we have. So this is divided into 5 parts. What is the current perception? I call it the old perception. What is the kryptonite of power? So what diminishes collective power dramatically? And individual power actually too. A thought experiment on violent individuals on violent individuals and power. So how what is the relationship between power and violence, and also then the connection of power and war. So what does that have to do with the violence, and how do war initiate and change paradigm in avoiding war and armed conflicts? Now, this piece is heavily influenced by Hannah Arendt. I recommend that you read actually everything that you can that she has written. This is very, very enlightening and explains a lot that has not only occurred in the 20th century, but also foreshadowed a lot of the 21st century. So let's go to the first point, our old perception. So currently, we see that our focus is essentially quite oversimplified. And what I want to strive is for a more holistic understanding that doesn't kind of just look at this separation of two, right? So it doesn't try to look at a world where war is being interpreted similar to some kind of sporting event, where someone can win and someone will lose, as if they were two football teams and then you must pick a football team. Actually, in war, most people lose. And this goes also beyond the people that participate within the war. However, if you have talked to people about any of the current wars that are going on, from Tigray to Ukraine to Gaza, then you probably encounter that many of them are mostly falling into this choose a side. And don't get me wrong, it's not that, and as we will see in the video, it's not that one side is, let's say, not responsible, that both sides are always responsible for war, or that one side is always good or one side is always bad, or that in certain wars it's clear that one side is the aggressor and the other is being aggressed. That's what I'm talking about, is to just essentially looking at war as picking a side and not being able to evaluate it. There's also a very big consensus of power in forms of violence and coercion. So if you look at any dictionary example of what power is, if you coerce or if you threaten people, then you hold power against them. And this is something that is not debated at all. So violence and power are essentially seen as the same. We have propaganda. Obviously, we have tons of propaganda. So naturally, there is not only propaganda from always only one side. Does not mean that both sides must engage in propaganda or that both sides completely lie. But propaganda plays a very big role in armed conflicts and war, and a lot of people are susceptible to. So that's what we should learn from that. And very important is the perpetuation of war. So we must understand that. I said 5,000 years, but actually it's been more than 3,000 years that war has been a part of human lives, and it seemed that it would stop, but we were always wrong. War has actually never stopped, so it just essentially keeps perpetuating. And the idea is to go beyond any of these simple views and not fall into establishing specific point of a specific war, or trying to evaluate or predict the outcomes of specific conflicts, but to look deep into our paradigm, look deep into humans and how we work, and then from there understand how power and war have a very close relationship, and how we can learn to use this to mitigate or perhaps even eradicate war in the future. So let's continue to the second point, power's kryptonite. So the main point that we must understand about power is that you can say that people have some kind of inherent power or influence over, right? As we have understood, power is influence over, for example, nature. So if you have a person who's marooned, so that it's only one individual in a remote island, they will still maybe have some power to fish, right? Or to have some kind of fruits from whatever tropical trees, if it's a tropical island. And they will have this possibility, right? In their set of possible actions, they will have this possibility to feed themselves. But in terms of social power, that they will not really be able to influence or control any human being. It doesn't matter if it's violence, coercion, or whatever, because these people are essentially on this deserted island that cannot communicate with anyone. They cannot essentially have influence over others, considering they have no communication with the outside world. Now, what's important to understand is that power can also be viewed from a point of view of economics. So in economics, if you isolate a specific person, then you are essentially marooning them from having any type of surplus. So essentially, if whatever they want to consume, they must produce themselves. And thus, from the point of view of Adam Smith, we have this very academic quote, which I will read out loud, and thus the certainty of being able to exchange all that surplus part of the produce of his own labor, which is over and above his own consumption, for such parts of the produce of other men's labor as he may have occasion for, encourages every man to apply himself to a particular occupation, and to cultivate and bring to perfection whatever talent or genius he may possess for that particular species of business. So essentially, even if this man, or be also naturally a woman, or any person, even if this person would be very good at fishing, and he or she could fish, let's say, 1,000 fish out of the water through some really creative nets, this person cannot never consume the 1,000 fish, and thus could never trade with anyone the surplus that they have, and thus it will remain forever until they die, that only will be able to have the amount of consumption that they produce, and anything that they produce extra will essentially be lost to rot, or essentially be lost to the as cost, right? As an economic cost, that there was some kind of labor that produced this fish for consumption, but they were not consumed, and thus, well, their economic cost, because this could have been traded to other people. So the most important point is that an isolated individual has no power. They have no surplus to engage with anyone, no matter how specialized and how much genius they have. It doesn't matter if they're the smartest people on earth. No single individual holds the ability to, for example, open up their own industrial complex, right? Like literally make all the bricks, like literally make all the mortar, like literally make all the architectural plans, carry everything, develop their own computers, develop their own chips, hold their own silicium or silicon to develop the chips. So that a person, a single individual that has no other access to other individuals and cannot trade, they cannot essentially engage in trade, they hold no power over anyone else, and thus they are very, very limited into the set of actions that they can hold. Right? Consider this then in terms of power. An isolated individual holds no power over anyone. Thus, no single human being, one single human being cannot wage war against. So one person individually cannot decide to wage war against all of humanity. They either must be supported by other humans, or must have some kind of technology that was not developed by themselves, right? So again, any of these very complex machines that could threaten other people en masse, they are not the outcome of a single individual. They are the outcome of time and effort spent by thousands of individuals that have developed our understanding of nature, of science, etc. And eventually, if it doesn't matter if it's a gun or something more complex, this will naturally need more and more people to create that. So individually, even if you have a person that would attack other people with their bare hands, they would need some kind of master or some kind of teacher who would teach these people how to fight generally, so they don't learn that completely by themselves. So we can say that the higher number of people that you aggregate and place under your will, also in terms of scientific prowess, will bring forth a higher set of possibilities for a specific individual. So if you convince more people to buy your goods or to work for you, and millions to buy the goods, that you can keep most of the surplus, right, from your genius, if you will, which still depends on others to buy this, and obviously depends on others to create them. You will have a much greater set of possibilities to your at hand. But it still follows that without the investment, let's say, of these people that would, or of these people that would develop some kind of weapon, or an investment of people that develop physics and language and so on, for you to develop your own company and to sell to people, it's not possible at all to actually have any power or to increase your set of possibilities of consumption, and also set of possibilities of choices. Again, here this person would have very limited choices. So moving on, so the kryptonite of power is when each individual is not trading ideas, is not trading goods, is not trading with other individuals. So individuals are essentially isolated. This would essentially eliminate all kinds of power, even in terms of purchasing power, even in terms of production, even in terms of political power. So let's go to the next thought experiment. So what is the relationship between violence and power? So let's consider that. And this will be taking more form as we go through, so that it's understood that what is the relationship then between power and war, and what can be done, which obviously is not going to be easy. So probably if it was very easy, we would have already done it. But it is still a possibility to be doing. Once we understand the notion between power and violence. So let's say that you have an initial individual, and this individual has another individual that engage in a relationship. And they are engaged in a relationship. This individual overpowers this other individual, and the common perception that we have is that power then is possible through influence, right? It doesn't matter if it's violence, coercion, or whatever. So we would say that this person holds a lot of power over this person, and this person would probably not be considered as too powerful, because this person is mostly an extension of whatever this person wants to be. So that is very important to understand. Power would be this person, and we would say this person is more or less powerless, and this person would engage probably because we don't consider that this person is going to be willing to stay in that relationship for long, because we don't actually think that people willingly choose to suffer over long periods of time, not generally. And thus, in order for this person to still hold power in the sense of that we consider it is accepted, right? To hold power, then they must control their time, what they're doing. They must control who they have communication with, what they do. And naturally that the set of options, right, that they don't have any surplus. They They cannot go into doing whatever they're good at and increasing their set of possibilities to become independent from this person, right? So this is one thing that actually is happening very commonly across the world where we have domestic violence, right? This is one example. Now, we probably wouldn't say that this individual is a powerful individual per se, especially because, well, I mean, just holding power over one individual wouldn't say necessarily mean that you are very powerful. Now, there are people who are also very, very controlling and also exert a lot of influence on their family, right? And this person would, again, probably be seen and considered to be a powerful person. Right? Now, the problem starts when you are trying to, I mean, you're not waging war at this point, but you're essentially cutting off the possibilities, right? The set of possibilities that these people have, you're making them lower and lower. So you're not exactly waging war, but these people will probably not uphold this willingly without some of these measures, right? So controlling their money, controlling communication, controlling their who they talk to, etc., etc. So once you start going into more and more people that you want to influence, right, in a violent manner, remember, this is a thought experiment, and you can only have violence as your means of holding power. So you may hold power over an entire community, right? So you have cults, for example, that do this, and to do that, you obviously have some kind of inner circle that then is going to hold power over more and more people, right? So who's going to control and to influence these other people. Now, within these communities and regions, as you have more and more people, then you must have some kind of reason why it is you, right? So here, for example, you don't need to have much more of a reason than mostly overpowering, or in most of the times overpowering this person. Right? So essentially, or probably more with muscles, right? But muscles are not going to cut it here when you are engaging into more and more and more people, where hundreds of people could easily overpower even the most strong or the strongest person in the world. And thus, you need to start to have some kind of justification. So it's not just I can overpower you, but that I am some kind of chosen person. And obviously this is something that happens when you are a leader of an entire region, so let's say some kind of international cult. Then you, as a person who reigns over with coercion and with violence and with other means that are effectively undermining the set of possibilities of each single individual, right? You're cutting the possibilities that they don't have access to education, they don't have access to communication in the outside world, at least not unless these people allow it to be. And thus, again, here, the individual power of these people are going to be severely cut and severely lowered because they have essentially zero influence. And the main point arising from this is that you obviously need people who support the one true, it could be divine being, or the one true leader, or the person who is obviously the most significantly powerful, right? The one that's chosen by some kind of divine entity, and that is always good, right? So that is never actually violent, and typically is never actually bad to anyone. It's just a benevolent person. The bad people are essentially only these people, right? The ones that are directly hurting me, but not this person. This person is all good and all-knowing. And if you go into a nation and you want to control a nation purely through violence, this goes into a totalitarian state. So in a nation that's a totalitarian state, you have the all-knowing, all-powerful being here that is heavily disconnected to any one of the people outside, so that any of the injustices that occur in here, the people would think, oh, if only the leader knew about these injustices, right? We are being heavily oppressed here, but it's not the leader's fault. It's the fault of these people. And typically the totalitarian is a man, right? So if he only knew how much we were suffering, then we would be free, right? But I trust that the one only Messiah, right? So a messianic thought, the one true leader, the only person who can actually help us is still this typically heavenly individual, or someone that has some kind of supernatural forces, never gets sick, and is sort of like very, very, very unique person that is the best in the world and obviously the best to govern. And in this case, you have all this kind of onion approach where you have the immediate people that know actually what's happening. They oppress then the other layers, and these other layers then oppress the other layers, so that the top people build some kind of pyramid where the one in the top is actually gaining most of the set of what they can do, right? So they can consume essentially everything that they want. They can do anything that they want. The law doesn't apply to them, obviously, right? And this is more or less how it looks in a violent nation, where power is essentially in the heads of these people, where power is concentrated only in one person. So instead of this person trying to protect, like a king that would give their life for their people, this kind of approach is this divine being, the king or president or totalitarian ruler, right? I mean, president in name, right? Because it's not necessarily a democracy here. It's a totalitarian state where this person is the one and only who holds every power. And this is actually something that is accepted, right? So that the person is the all-powerful. But the problem arises when we have all this propaganda, right? So and this doesn't change much from this point. This point still remains, even though it's an entire nation. The mechanisms to diminish the power of other people are still relatively the same. And the question is, well, if violence can lead to power, and power is, I mean, if the actual tyrant is this abusive partner that can rule and govern over everyone else because they're so brilliant and because they're so good, then why do you need all of this propaganda to do so? I mean, if the power lies only, like literally, with this person, then why do you need to crack down on literally convincing people that this is the case? Not 24 hours a day, because no one is awake 24 hours a day, but as long as they have interactions with other people and with media. Why would that be the case? And as Hannah Arendt correctly states, the power always is or lies with the people, independent if it's a democracy, if it's a totalitarian state, or if it's any other type of government. Why? Because no single person can wage war against everyone else. And that is as simple as it gets. And this is the relationship between power and violence. As power increases, then you need a higher accumulation of power through an increase of power in each of these individuals. So the collective, as collective power increases, thus there must be lower and lower violence and coercion. As violence and coercion increases in what people would say that is a concentration of power, in which these people kind of make a choice or an investment, if you will, towards saying, yes, well, I willingly give this power to this person, then the collective power is going to be much, much, much lower. The collective power being the set of possible actions that you can make and the influence that you can exert actually on others. This has been true for, I mean, there are so many examples of where people just rise up and go against the leader, that most of the leaders that want a totalitarian state, they clearly understand the importance of continuously suppressing and continuously taking away choices that the individuals are doing, and continuously convincing their minds, taking away communication to the external world, taking away their time, and also controlling the amount of set of possibilities of consumption that they have heavily, because they understand that if they don't, there are enough examples where people actually understand what's going on. They understand that they have always held the power, and they can obviously topple the government. So what does this have to do with war? So coming to the point of consisting of understanding the relationship between war and violence. Well, as I told you before, the first point is that as you increase violence, then you will decrease the amount of power that you have. So how does it work? Well, it's actually quite simple. The violent leader, right, will have a very specific and limited set of possibilities and attention span. So the violent leader cannot attend to everything and cannot make every decision. However, someone thinks that they can, they will not be able to understand the whole complexity of the world. So they essentially have a very, very myopic vision of what the world is like. So they are they typically stifle innovation. I mean, obviously, there are some instances where you can force people that are very, very smart in terms of understanding science, technology, engineering, and math, and force them to develop some kind of weapon systems, for example. But even here, we see that weapon systems where people are free are sadly better. Right? This is simply because you have a much higher degree of freedom for everyone, and these can have a much better impact into their choices, their individual choices, and then people generally can create much better science. They can create much better understanding of their environment, and obviously they can focus on that which they're good at, which typically increases the amount of surplus that they can achieve. So the tyrant's human constraints lead to a sort of what I call a collective cage that dramatically reduces the amount of power that people have, and dramatically reduces the choices, right, that these individuals have. And thus, the collective power is diminished. Very important, right? In this case, what I've been saying is that it's really a point that I want to press. Even if I have said it 3 times, I will say 4 or 5. The main mechanisms for which a violent partner functions, a gang, a mafia, a cartel in a region, or even an entire nations, they are similar. Okay, and one of the foreshadows I want to do is if you exacerbate violence here, which is something typical in tyrannical systems, then this violence is a means to create more violence, specifically of people who are told, right, who are people who you say are the opponents, and then there will be a very high will for violence. But just foreshadowing a bit, if you don't engage in violence, which essentially increases collective power, then there will be a possibility to asphyxiate war. So coming back to the points of violence and the war, the other point is that violence or achieving some kind of position through violence increases the probability to being an illegitimate authority. So essentially, you will have a person who is in power who on paper sounds very good, but they are not necessarily going to be good people. Sorry, I have a mistake here, society. And not that they're not good people, but they are not going to bring forth some kind of progress. I mean, for some people, obviously, they will bring forth some kind of progress, but this progress is going to be at a very high cost, right? Through surveillance, through violence. So there will be a gigantic cost of also instilling, right, of bringing this violence to the people, which in fact is one of the main reasons that when this surveillance and all of these efforts are not brought forth, then the typical response of the people below, the ones that thought, as we see here, if only the leader knew about these injustices, this person only knows violence. So what happens when they found out that the authority is not legitimate, right? That this person is not actually a Messiah, that this person is not actually sent by God, and that this person is actually just abusing you, then this results into quite some violent response, to which dictators have literally been horribly killed by their own people. So it is important to recognize that violence typically means that the authority is illegitimate. And we can even see this with a lot of the autocratic authorities that we have, who clearly have a lot of interest in showing, at least, right, because it's a show, some kind of voting that actually will not be able to, under the current views of voting and what it's for, right, and respecting the vote. It's just a show to have some kind of legitimacy that says, yes, the people actually do still want, right? So this is why you cannot call them votes, or you cannot call them elections, because they're not elections. There's nothing to elect. There's nothing to choose, right? Again, you're taking away all of these possibilities from the people. But this is just merely to add some kind of legitimacy, which obviously will typically be difficult if people are knowledgeable, right? If they can think in more complex manners and are not susceptible to these ideas of messianic leaders. And another point is the expansion of violence. So typically when you have these regimes or these ideas that you have some kind of extra muscle that you can use, right? Like in terms of weapons and weapon systems, and you can then have even more, right? So you can even have expand your circle of influence, which will generally then provide more consumption for these people, right? Then they probably will do it. That's actually kind of what happens all the time. And I'm very important to understand that there are all kinds of different types of rulers and people, and like in the Roman Empire, it's they did have wars and conquests and so on, and they, however, brought a lot of, which doesn't justify, right, killing people. But however, there must be a nuance to this. So it's not that all states are totalitarian or whatever, but we can see that violence can be expanded once you have this idea that, well, you can govern over others, and you have this surplus, right? Typically some kind of scientific surplus of how you can manage to win wars, or how you can kill other people most efficiently, and so on. And the number of violent spaces also increase within the system, right, within the country. And very important, there is always in all of these systems some us versus them. There is never, ever, ever, ever a totalitarian system where you say, well, you know, I don't belong to you. I don't feel as being a part of you. Most totalitarians essentially state, you are me, I am you, right? We are the same. And in order to kind of use this violence that has been increased here, and to have this violence somewhere else than to the obvious problems that typically you cause in your country, like even famine or poverty or anything, then you must say, well, all of this poverty and famine are negative consequences. They are most definitely not my illegitimate authority and that I can't govern. They are a problem of someone else, some other country, some other person. It could be people within your nation, right? And this is kind of like the beast in the Lord of the Flies. It's essentially someone to blame who will kind of fall for that. So what can we do about it? How can we change the paradigm, right? Because, I mean, all of these have negative consequences, and they add, they diminish the value of not only economic value, but also social value and creative value. The amount of innovation that will occur is very, very low. And thus, how can we actually do this? Right? And before we go into that, so just want to say this again, right? So some conflicts are essentially people who just want to defend themselves, right? Some conflicts, they don't have two sides. It's just one side that wants to eliminate the other, right? And this makes it very, very dangerous, because, and this is another point why we should then actually actively change these notions of power, and essentially giving these people, giving these illegitimate authorities and perpetuating the idea that they actually have a lot of power, which they don't, right? The power lays within the people. It's very important because even one person, right? The fault can lay on one side, so even one person can start a war, right? Just, again, use the us versus them, and you can start a war even with your brothers and sisters. So, how can we do this? The last part in this, hopefully not very boring video, but I hope you understand that this is relatively complex topic. I mean, some videos go way longer and they only focus on specific wars. And here we're trying to focus on the notion, why do these wars even start, and how to actually reduce, right? Beyond just going into any of these realpolitik ideas that war is just simply human-made, right? And it's part of humanity. Actually, in a more complex view, we can see that we have some options. So first of all, what can we do, right? How can we at least make it more difficult for war to break out, right? Maybe not completely eradicate it, but at least make it more difficult. And well, the first thing that we could do is comprehend the complexity of the world. So if we have some kind of ideas that we can clearly just essentially prop up anyone, right? You can make anyone famous if you invest enough. And then from that have some kind of halo effects that if they are media constantly says, or propaganda or any communication channel constantly says that this person is benevolent or this person is a messiah and that they can do no wrong, then probably if we have an understanding as human beings that this is more than less a red flag, that no such a person really exists, and that there is no real point that there's only one person who can actually govern a country, right? So probably a set of people that would make sense to govern. This could radically lower the value of propaganda. This could radically lower the opportunities of illegitimate figures coming into power, right? So this is very important. Furthermore, the us versus them. For example, we can introduce Viktor Frankl, right, who essentially states, well, there are two kinds of people, decent and indecent people. And in all kinds of groups, you will find these two types of people. You will have indecent and decent people from Europe. You will have decent and indecent people from North and South America. You will have decent and indecent people in Africa. It's not that we look at people based on groups, but based on whether they will actually be decent or the indecent choice, if they adhere to just basic human decency. That would also make it easier, right? But again, we tend to think of groups as being bad or good, right? So it's not the groups, but the actual actions within the groups and the people that we can go more into detail, right? And understand that they will, more decent people, be more difficult to actually go into being an illegitimate authority. And overall understanding complexity, right? Like obviously the way that you circumvent being a totalitarian person or a leader is by simply stating, well, obviously when George Orwell wrote 1984, he meant my opponent, right? And obviously when we say that non-decent people, that's obviously my opponent, right? And everyone that opposes me then fulfills these ideas by Frankl or by Orwell or by anyone else, right? To just twist the point, I am the good person and bad person. So it's about sensitizing, not reducing into bad or good, right? Not looking at just an individual and categorizing and looking at us versus them, but essentially understanding the nuances, the complexities, right, of identifying propaganda, of seeing that there are certain words that propaganda uses that are more, it doesn't matter if someone calls the opponent the bad person or the indecent person. There are many, many wordings, right, like that tend toward violence that you can use to identify propaganda and not use this very reduced view that we have. We can also activate people, so individual participation, right? As I said before, propaganda may be difficult to identify, and as I foreshadowed, there are some points that we can use, that we can stop looking at just absolute terms like a good or bad or left or right or black and white, to start thinking in terms of more complexity, right? Of value creation towards the community, or right? Will these policies create more value? And for that, you need not only active civil participation, but also you need an active understanding of the complexities of the world. And obviously, to generate as much as possible an active life, so a life that engages in politics, right? So it's not that you just essentially want to produce something, right? Because, I mean, anyone who produces anything, like even if you just produce furniture, and you say, well, I only produce furniture, right? Let me just go back to this point. I never actually supported this guy, or well, yeah, it's typically a man. And I just produce furniture before this guy came, and I will produce furniture. I don't want any trouble, right? This is a very passive life. So they essentially dedicate their jobs or their lives to work only. And by doing so, they enable and encourage this type of people to come into authority. And these are also, through their inaction, which is a very hot topic right now, through their inaction, even if they never participated, they actually participate because they bring the economic surplus to this person. Even if they don't support them, or even if they don't think that they support them, they do, because they keep the regime alive. They sustain the regime, and all of their surplus, or most of their surplus that we talked about, is going to go to the top of this regime. So it's very important to consider that we need active politic life, and we need more and more spaces where we can actively talk about politics. Personally, I have seen more and more spaces that just because they want to avoid conflict, they try to eliminate any kind of controversy. And they do this by saying, well, we don't talk about politics here, which is not a way to deter propaganda. It is just a way of perpetuating the possibilities of being just a bystander who will, through their non-participation, be responsible for these people coming into power. And the last point is understanding power as a collective. So the amount of power that an organization has, the amount of power that a person, that a community has. So in terms of their amount of choices that they can achieve, they are clearly a collective, and they're clearly based on how well they engage in trade and how well they can actually be free, right, to innovate, to create. And this must be a very good takeaway, that we understand that power is grows as we have a collective, and it diminishes as we are more isolated. And thus, we want to increase the amount of power, and we can do so by having complex systems where we allow people to focus on that with their genius, and obviously allowing even the lowest levels of social hierarchy to develop as much as possible. Very important. So in this case, a lot of very developed nations that have not been able to integrate the lowest levels of social hierarchy, they can also even increase their power by doing so. Okay, and we can obviously actively defend peace, democracy, and as I said before, become an active player to obviously always diminishes or tries to diminish violence, right? And obviously tries to understand and to understand that no system will be able to govern them completely, because the power lies within the people. And obviously, this doesn't mean that an individual by themselves can change an entire system, right? No individual can effectively go into a government building and say, well, now I am the president or whatever, and I'm also the Supreme Court, and I am also the legislative branch, and everyone must adhere to me. Probably most people will laugh, because no one will actually grant them that. But we never know, based on our actions, we can actually create enough inertia for many people to come together and understand this. Right? Now, it's very important not to fall into the idea, right? So I don't want to increase this video too much, right? But at the end of the day, this idea seems very attractive still to people because there are many, many unsolved issues within our world, even within a democratic system. And for that, I recommend to see that, well, we must also engage with this economic inefficiencies that we cause, and how we can also obviously increase these amount of power through creativity, right? Through engaging in a new base of more and higher complexity. So it's not, again, that any of these is to be understood. So just that I can show you all of them together, right? It's not to be understood that any of these by themselves are going to solve all of these problems. It's to be understood that these actions are aimed towards making it more difficult to engage in war, understanding the enormous costs that it brings, even if we don't look at the gigantic costs of like the literal cash that needs to be spent on tanks and oil and all kinds of logistics that is just being wasted and not being spent into more creative outputs. It's really important to understand that this is just one of the pieces into changing our paradigm that will eventually generate more value for human beings. So if you made it this far to the entire video, I hope that you see the complexities, that you understand that how we perceive power influences war, and that this expository piece has answered the question how we perpetuate war through our collective paradigm, mostly by understanding or misunderstanding the idea of power.